So we're going to start with a really quick, like super fast of what we did yesterday. Oh, I should introduce myself. My name's Matthew Orsborn. I'm a New Zealander originally, still am, my passport says, but I'm mostly based in Taiwan at Dharma Drum Institute of Liberal Arts. So if you are in Taiwan, if you're visiting Taiwan, come up to Jinshan on the north coast and come and see us at Dharma Drum. Okay. So the topic is knowing mind, cultivating the mind, Buddhist psychology. Let's do like a power refresher on the assumption that once you left here yesterday and you went home and went to sleep and woke up, everything was totally forgotten. Okay. Hopefully that's not the case. But anyway. Okay. So we talked about different, systems of thought and their different worldviews, this idea of isms. We talked about differences like between belief in only material, like there's only matter, the physical world, nothing else exists. And some other people think, only mind or spirit exists, and there is truly no matter, everything's an illusion, combinations thereof. Most forms of Buddhism fall into that category, but some forms of Buddhism kind of fall into this category. Maybe some other combination, nihilistic worldview. And talking about, what are our own worldviews? How do we see the world? And why? And more importantly, do our views, does the way in which we see the world and understand the world and how the world works, does it even make any difference? And it seemed that our general consensus here was that yes, it does. And I would very much agree. We looked at a couple of verses from a Buddhist text, the Dhammapada, talking about the importance of mind, and that while we do have, in most Buddhists thought the idea that there is physical matter, but there is also something very different, which is mind, and it's a very different thing to matter. It's not just that what we think of as the mind is just some product of the material world, but it's actually a distinctly and different thing. And just a couple of verses to kind of illustrate that. And while we see that in this kind of Buddhist perspective that we do have both matter and mind, which one's kind of the most important? Do you remember? No, you have forgotten everything from yesterday. Okay. It's mind in the lead, right? Mind is the ruler. So mind does seem to be the more important of the two, but we're not going to reject the material world either. We looked at some Buddhist frameworks, dependent origination, this idea that whatever exists or happens in the world is dependent on some other things, and those things in turn are dependent on other things, and those things are dependent on other things. So we have this causal process. And the classic example of this are the so-called four holy truths or the four noble truths. Dissatisfaction, I don't want to say suffering, but dissatisfaction. There's a reason for dissatisfaction. It's possible to end dissatisfaction, and then there is a method to end that dissatisfaction. That's the classic four truths of Buddhism. We looked a little bit about this idea of dependent origination and the cycle of life, and then we wanted to break down. So our main topic is knowing the mind and cultivating the mind, and we have 3 steps in how this sort of dissatisfaction, how our human problems come about in 3 stages, right? And then if we want to deconstruct that dissatisfaction and we want to solve the problem, we also have 3 steps, and of course the 3 steps are like reverse order. So corresponding to our physical and verbal actions, we have so-called training in morality. So often I say precepts, right? Precepts. We have training in meditation, we have training in wisdom, and then we kind of looked into these in a bit more detail. This idea of these subconscious like seeds within the mind, right? And we have a lot of seeds. I see somebody at the back, my goodness, you're wearing an All Blacks jersey. Very impressive. Don't see that very often. Little New Zealander inside information, never mind. Okay, we're talking about these potentials within the mind as like seeds, and basically within our minds, how many seeds do we have? How many seeds do you think you have in your mind? like millions, gazillions of potential seeds, right? But as seeds, they're latent. They're not really doing anything. They're just sitting there as seeds, waiting for those conditions to pop up. And we get two different sorts. We get different sensations, right? Pleasant sensations, painful sensations, and neutral sensations. And these are like the warmth and the water and the sunlight and the soil that make the seeds sprout, right? So painful sensations cause sprouts of aversion and anger to pop up. Pleasant sensations stimulate these seeds of desire and craving, and neutral sensations stimulate seeds of ignorance. So that's one type of seed, these kind of emotional seeds, right? Like craving and aversion. And we also talked about some other ones like jealousy or pride. There's lots of different forms. But we also have seeds for thoughts and perceptions, more of like a kind of conceptual type seeds. Sight, sounds, aromas. Classic example is this is, you see something and you go, this is a green tree. And these are based on past experience. So the past experience, of course, is what sowed the seed in the first place, so that in the future or in the present, that seed can resprout, right? We've seen a green tree before. We've seen green before. We've seen trees before. When we get this stimulation on our senses, we can say, this is a tree, this is a green tree, this is so-and-so person, this is something else, and not just from what we see, from what we hear, smell, taste, touch, etc. These use names and concepts, and they're also kind of abstracted things, right? Because if we haven't seen this tree before, we can still recognize it as a tree, because we have an abstract idea of what a tree is. We talked about icebergs, but instead of being 10% of the conscious mind and 90% of the subconscious mind, it's more like 0.0000001% of the conscious mind and this massive amount of unconscious material that we have inside us. That's a lot of stuff, and we don't even know what it is. That's the kind of potentially concerning, but also potentially very good, right? Kind of works both ways. We have a lot of potentials that we don't know for something pretty bad, but we also have a lot of potentials for some really amazing and good things too, right? But the main thing is, it's a lot of stuff, a lot of potentials. We then looked at the active affliction. So once the seeds get stimulated, then we have these thoughts, we have these emotions. The seeds sprout from this dormant state, and then we can be aware. Like if I say, what are you thinking now? What are you feeling now? That is the active state of mind. That's the second step in this process of cognition. There we go. We've kind of already talked about this. So we see this, and we might have some feeling, right, or some ideas that are active in our state of mind. And conceptually, right, so in terms of the ideas and the words and language and these concepts, we also don't just go, this is a green tree, or this is Bob, or this is Susan, but we also then start to construct these things based around what? How do we construct these thoughts and ideas? Do you remember? What's at the center? Do you remember what's at the center? Yeah, ourselves, right? We've constructed this, this is me, and then we expand out from there. And what do we tend to do? What do we put in the middle of this center? Usually things that give us pleasure. We draw them in. That's literally craving and desire. Taking things, drawing them in, and things that give us pain, discomfort, displeasure, what do? Aversion, we push them away, right? So it's a very interesting, self-centered thing. And so you've got the emotions, the pleasant things drawing in, painful things pushing out, but we also have a lot of conceptual ideas about, this belongs to me, or this is mine, right? And we also draw these to the center, and things that we think of as other than ourselves, not me, other people's things, other people's countries, cultures, etc., foreign things, right? We also push out, right? And these two lines, the emotional line and the kind of conceptual line, work together. They mutually influence each other. And then, so this is still at the level of the inner active mental states. And of course, once they reach a certain threshold, we start to act externally, right? The things we do, the things we say, such as rolling your eyes, shrugging your shoulder, shaking your head. So what basic emotion does this represent, for example? Happiness? Pleasure? No, right? Some kind of painful experience, discomfort, don't like, reject. And then, okay, we've almost caught up. So much of our action that we do, and you could probably argue, it sounds pretty cynical, but it's probably unfortunately quite true. Most of our actions that we engage in during our day-to-day life are centered around this: seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, seeking to protect the me, the I, the mine. And we can also say that the reverse is true, right? So seeking the pleasure is seeking to protect the me and the mine. Avoiding pain is seeking to maybe, reject the other. And then we had an example of the pufferfish. And we are all little pufferfish with our little spiky things to protect ourselves, right, from the painful things. I think this is where we got up to yesterday, right? Okay, that was a whirlwind, 10-minute recap. And where do we go to from here? Oh, and then I gave you a little preview last time of this process. So let's lay out this process step by step through time in terms of these different primarily mental states and mental elements that make up our lives, but there's also the material elements as well. So we're going to start with our sense organs. Does anyone here have sense organs? Please raise your hand if you have sense organs. Okay, some people don't have sense organs. You are inanimate. I know that the chair here did not raise his hand, which is very correct. I don't think chairs are sentient. We have sense organs. How many sense organs do you have? And this is where you see the Buddhists from the non-Buddhists. Yeah. So we've got 6, but 5 are what we call external sense organs, right? Our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and our body. And we have an internal sense organ, which is the mind. Okay, so in Buddhist, I mention this, because in English we'll say like the 6th, if you say the 6th sense, right? It's like we've got 5 senses. The 6th sense is this kind of like mysterious ability. That's in colloquial English. But for Buddhists, of course, the 6th sense is just the mind. Nothing mysterious about it. Okay. In this example, we'll start with an example of an external sense organ. And we can maybe use the example in a minute of maybe things that we see. Human beings, we tend to be more visually oriented, say, compared to some other animals. Say dogs, for example, are probably much more like smell oriented or something like that. Right? And it's easier for us to look at this by starting with the external organs. They're a bit more open and obvious to us. So we have sense organs, and of course we also then have sense objects. I'm using this kind of light green color to indicate material things, physical things, okay? So in Buddhist terms, your eyes are the matter. They are made up of various forms of material matter. And also the objects. So we need an object. The objects I can show you here are very boring. So look at the whiteboard. It's very boring, to be honest. Maybe we can make it a bit more interesting. I'll do an attempt of like a... That's supposed to be someone meditating, by the way. That's a bad example, I shouldn't do it. We need this like statue of the Buddha up here or something. Better example. Okay, so we've got sense organs and we have sense objects, right? So we've got eyes and we can see this image here. Both of these are matter, the material things. And then we're going to look at this process over time, right? So we're going to kind of plot this in this direction through time. But when I say time here, in the very technical Buddhist sense, this time is measured in these little tiny, tiny units of time, right? The technical term in Sanskrit is called a kshana. In Chinese, that's chana. In Pali, it's kanna. And they're like the shortest measurement of time you can have. It's like a moment. Even a finger snap is something like, many hundreds of moments of time. So this process, even though it occurs in time, is super, super fast, right? If we have multiple moments of time, it's like a nanosecond, right? So what happens next with the sense organs and the sense object? We then have what we call a cognition. Now, most translations here in English will use the term consciousness. And I'd prefer not to use that term, and I'll explain why in a minute. And I'm using a different color here. This is kind of more blue color. This is physical matter, but this act of cognition is not. It's what we call mental, cognitive, right? It's not physical matter. And this is kind of interesting because it can also indicate that these material things are causes and conditions for a mental thing. So this idea of causality can work back and forth between matter and mind, right? Now, these are not the only causes and conditions for cognition. We also need to have an earlier moment of cognition, but never mind that. So what do we mean by cognition here? What do we mean by cognition? If we look at this, we just had a look at this here. Now, if you're active, shall we say, seeing, right? Are you seeing at this moment? Okay, everyone, put down your pens. Eyes, shung, over here. If you're seeing this, that is what we mean by cognition. Now, you might think, if I say, what are you seeing? And you say, I'm seeing a very bad drawing of a meditator. That idea, that thought that comes up, I'm seeing a picture of the Buddha. That is not cognition. That's actually a slightly later step. Just seeing, what we might call bare seeing. Or if we did the same thing for sound, for example. So in a second, it helps if maybe you could just close your eyes and listen to the fans. So just close your eyes and listen. Right? That sound, okay, you can open your eyes now. That sound, when you're hearing, is then sound of a fan, hearing, right? Just hearing. It's not your ideas about the hearing or what you think, what sound is that? What made that sound? Do I like it? Do I not like it? No. That comes a little bit later. Okay, you get the idea here of cognition? Just those really raw, bare cognition of these different sensory stimuli. What's the next step? Okay, now we've seen some of these already. Because we also then have these, we'll get to that in a second. The next thing we have is sensation, right? So we've already talked about that sensation, right? Remember, we have 3 different flavors. What are the 3 flavors? Sorry? Pleasant, unpleasant, or either painful and neutral. Technically, it's not neutral. It's neither pleasant nor painful. Let's just say neutral. Okay. And then when we remember what happens, say, if we are, let's imagine that pizza again. Your nose your nose, pizza, it's like the wafting steam of the pizza, you smell it. Okay. And then what sensation might you have? Pleasant. I just kind of assume everyone likes pizza. It's not necessarily true, but pleasant sensation, right? Now remember, we have these underlying mental seed potentials. So if that's a pleasant sensation from the pizza, what kind of thing happens next? Do you remember? What's our usual response to pleasant sensations? Yeah, what's that? This is exactly it. Give me the pizza. Okay, that is craving, right? Or desire. So, boom, popping out here, we're going to have desire or aversion or whatever. Now remember, this comes from these, actually, right? And we also have, so we have sensations, right? Pleasant, unpleasant, whatever. And remember, we also have those perceptions, those thoughts, those concepts about it. So let's say you're just walking down the street, you walk past some Italian restaurant or something, you smell that smell. You don't see a sign and you don't see what it is, right? You just get that smell, but what thought might come up in your head? Right? I don't know. Pizza. Smells like pizza or something. You might not be able to. It smells like Italian food, probably. Because actually your nose might not have, if it was just basically baked bread, cheese, a bit of tomato, olive, something. That could be pasta. Let's really think about this. This could be pasta. You're going to say, Italian food smells, right? Probably. If you're only smelling it. And then what happens based on that? Okay, now, this is, of course, a bit of a leap. But what you might do is then, you want some pizza, right? Now, you can't just walk into the shop and some other customer is sitting there eating pizza and, well, thank you very much. And, you physically can do that. It's rather socially unacceptable to do that. We have this thing where we do what? We exchange pieces of paper and weird-shaped pieces of metal and rocks, and they give us pleasant-smelling food, right? And then it's mine, and then then you can eat it, right? And also remember as well, so when you first smell it, of course, your first thought isn't me, me or mine. It would be, this is pizza or this is food, and you're going to go through this process. Maybe you're hungry, you think you'd like to eat that. You might have thoughts like, it's my favorite food, I like pizza. Even this thought, I like pizza, is still a concept from our side, and it's going to lead us through this process maybe of going in and buying it and eating it. Right? So this is a bit of a jump here. I've kind of sped up the process, but you get the idea, right? Now, in the technical Buddhist sense of the process, the thing that happens next is the intention, but actually these here are just this, right? So this kind of arrow and this arrow, I'm just separating these two out rather than lumping them all together as intention, right? Now, if we get to this point already, we have, and some of you might notice, what are known as the 5 aggregates in Buddhism, right? We've mentioned these a couple of times yesterday. Has anyone heard of these 5 aggregates? It's really the English word aggregate has become the standard word. In Chinese would usually be Wu Yun, like in the Heart Sutra, right? Wu Yun. Some other translations like Wu Zhong, Wu In, aggregate. Basically what it means is, if you think of, we take humans as an example of a living being, here's a living being, here's a living being, here's another living being, each of you are living beings. We want to say, well, what makes up me, this living being? We can break that down into different subcategories. There are lots of ways of breaking it down. There's not just one way. But the most common way to do it is to break up who we are into 5 different types of elements, right? The first one is the physical body. The second one, and then the next 4 are all actually internal and mental. It's kind of interesting, right? You can see that Buddhism gives weight to the physical body and also the mental world, but gives more weight to the mental world. So the physical body, the second one is, which one? Probably feelings, right? So that's what I'm calling sensations here, remember? The next one is then perceptions, which I'm also using perceptions. And earlier I said like thoughts and even concepts, using words and language. That's number 3. Number 4 is what? Mental formations. That's a really abstract word. What is a mental formation? This is pretty hard to translate, right? Basically, it's kind of all the other mental activities that go on, the driving forces, right? And that's why here we have it as intentions. And of course, desire and aversion are forms of intention. And also, classifying things as me or mine or other are also mental formations, right? They're intentions with regard to objects, for example. And what's the last one? What's number 5? The 5th aggregate. Usually gets translated as consciousness. Here, I'm using the word cognition. So bam, in this process, we see all 5 of these, right? So basically, this is the physical form, right? So a physical form, sensation, perception, intention, and cognition. And you might think, well, why is it in a different order? That's a very good question. Probably, this is the order of process, but the 5 aggregates, I think, are given more in order of how obvious they are to see and know. It's really easy to identify your physical body and the physical bodies of others. Sensations and perceptions, not too difficult. The most subtle one to notice is that cognition. Because like I said, if we say, well, look at this, and I just say, look at it, we don't just look at it. We immediately start to label it, we immediately start to have thoughts and opinions about it and feelings about it, and that gets in our way of just seeing it, right? And for most people, we can't tell the difference. That's why, if you have that pizza, most people will point at the pizza and go, the pizza is nice to eat. No. A pizza is not nice to eat. It's also not nice to eat either. Being nice to eat is not a property of the pizza. Being nice to eat is a property of our own minds, right? But we can't separate that out. We can't separate that out, right? We think that these sensations and these perceptions belong to the object. They do not. They come from within our own minds. That's also why cognition is really hard. Most people, we just mash all these together, right? Some basic meditation practice is an excellent tool to learn to see this process and separate this out. Okay, now we're not finished yet. Remember, because what happens after we have intentions? So these intentions include our cravings and aversions and jealousy and pride and all these mental activities on the mental level, right? But what's the third step? Right, we had underlying seed potentials, active mental states. What's the third step? Remember? Action, physical and verbal actions, right? So we have another step here, physical and verbal actions, and now we're back to green again, right? So we've gone from the material world through the inner mental world, and we come back out again at our physical and verbal actions again. right? So the causal process goes through these. They matter creates and drives mind, and mind creates and drives matter. And of course, it doesn't end there either, because what's happened? I mean, when we say physical and verbal actions, these are the things that we do with our physical bodies, and this is basically our physical body as well. So, boom, this feeds back here, and it also feeds back here as well, to our physical world. So if you take, for example, we'll just keep running with the pizza motif, shall we? So let's say you've got, let's slow this down a second. So we just gave an example of one sense organ, right? Seeing, or smelling. We're using smelling, right? Smelling, you're basically smelling, pleasant smell, perceptions, it's pizza, desire for the pizza. Then what do? So let's say you're still just walking down the street and you're fairly hungry, and then what's your physical and verbal action that comes next? Check it out. So what does that mean to check it out? Okay, yeah, stop. Maybe even before that, breathe deeper. Okay, so what are you doing just when you stop and breathe deeper? Just as simple as that, right? You're actually kind of putting feedback into your sense organ, right? Putting the attention back to your nose. And you might stop as well. And if you think the smell comes from a certain direction, you might turn towards that direction, right? Okay. Now, we've already gone through this process at least once, and now we're coming back here again. And we're reorienting our sense organ with respect to the object in order to, shall we say, highlight this process. If it's a pleasant smell, what do? We'll move towards the object, right? So before we talked about like the self-centering and bringing pleasant things towards ourselves, but it works both ways, right? Sometimes we can move the objects towards us, but sometimes we move ourselves towards the object. It's the same thing, really. It's just closing the gap, right? So at first with the smell, so you might turn, the act of turning and stopping, you think it comes from the shop, so you go inside, is us reorienting our sense organs with respect to the object to strengthen this cognition, to strengthen the sensations, the pleasant sensations. We want them stronger, more. I want more of the smell, it's pleasant, right? You see that process? And of course, we might also engage in other things as well. We want to see it. You know, if it smells nice, but it looks bad, then we get a bit of conflict, right? When we see it, now we're switching to a different sense organ. Right? Now you could say, is it the same object? It's kind of the same object, but now instead of the smell, it's actually different. Before it was the smell of the pizza, now it's the visual appearance of the pizza. And then we have cognitions about that. We have different sensations and perceptions and intentions. And like I'm saying, we get the feedback again. Now, what it might be, maybe not for the pizza example, because if you haven't bought the pizza, you wouldn't pick up the pizza to examine it closer. But let's say we had that other example yesterday of like, you go to the shop, you see a dress you like, an item of clothing that you like. You might first move yourself closer to it so you can see it better. But what else do? You pick it up, right? You bring the object towards you. You look at it in different ways. What are you doing? You're just trying to run through this process. And you might not only be looking at trying to strengthen the pleasant sensations, you might be critically also looking for faults with it as well, right? You buy an item of clothing, you might want to check it, like, is it well made? Right? Look at the seams. Do we have frayed threads? Or the same with maybe back to the pizza again, You might look at it. Does it have something on you don't like? Ooh, it's got an anchovy on it. I'm vegetarian. Bleh. Immediately, because I might not smell it, but I might see it. And immediately my perceptions, it's got anchovy, it's got fish, but I have a self-perception that I'm vegetarian. Now, what does this create? This actually creates then unpleasant sensation within me. And then what? Eee. It's for me. Oh, it's got meat in. Drop it, leave, walk away. Instant rejection. Even though maybe I didn't notice the smell, and maybe up until that point everything was very pleasant. And so we're also then kicking in our perceptions and involving not just a perception of what it is, but also perception with respect to my self-identity and my beliefs on who I am or who I'm not. So likewise, you could be looking at that dress and I don't know what, maybe for some reason it's oh, I know. So it looks very nice, looks wonderful. Oh, you hold it up and look at yourself in the mirror. Oh, lovely, lovely, lovely. I know, let's look at the price tag. So then we've got another whole cycle going, right? So you look at the price tag, you see the price tag, you're seeing, now maybe not really the sensation first, but the perception, and you read the price tag, and the dress says, I don't know, $2,499. How do you feel about that? Yeah, maybe not, right? I'm not buying a wedding dress here. It's not a ball gown. I'm just looking for something to wear around the house. Thank you very much. And I'm not going to pay $2,500 for it. Now, the words written on that tag aren't visually unpleasant. You're not actually getting a visual painful sensation. It doesn't hurt your eyes. We might just, oh, it's hurting my eyes, the price tag is too much. You get the bill, oh, it hurts. It's not actually the visual thing, is it? What is it? You've now actually got this, so you've got this perception here that it costs X amount of dollars. That in turn becomes an object. And now we're moving into not our external sense organs with an external object, but our mind as a sense organ looking at a mental object. All right? And that might mean, oh, this price tag of $2,500 for a very basic, like, item of clothing, then it might be painful. I think, oh, no way, can't afford that. Of course, even if you say can't afford it, you're already doing a huge amount of mental mathematics going on, right? Because even this idea of can't afford is based on all these ideas, concepts about how much money you have, what you want to spend on other things, blah, 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 blah. This process is going through a couple of thousand times just for us to be looking at that price tag and go, nah, no, don't want it, don't want to buy it. And you might still be left in this conflict, right? I would like that to be mine. I would like it, but I don't want to have to pay for it. So my physical and verbal action is, I don't know, leave it on the shelf, leave it on the rack. It might be very wistful, like, oh, can I just look one more time, take a photo, show my friends, show them the price tag. Would be so nice. Okay, right. There's a complex process to go through. But you can see just in a simple act of smelling some food when you're hungry and deciding whether or not you want to buy it or eat it, or going to the store and looking at an item of clothing and assessing whether or not you want to buy it. I mean, you could still, let's keep it really wide open. It could be that the dress itself gives you such a pleasing feeling. Oh, it looks wonderful to me, it's perfect. Oh, I always wanted a dress like this, but the price tag I don't want, I can't afford the money. Well, I mean, you could steal it. It's possible. I just want to say possible. I'm not advocating theft here, okay? But it's possible, right? But we're, of course, then thinking, oh, Would I steal an item of clothing? Well, of course not. I mean, there's security cameras everywhere. Like, how could I steal things? I don't steal things. I'm not a thief, etc., etc. Zoom, zoom, zoom. This process is going through a couple of thousand times as well. And we decide against it. I hopefully decide, do not steal the clothing. Okay, no matter how nice it is, it's not worth it. Don't do that. But you get the idea, right? You get the idea. Maybe you think, well, it's too much. Maybe I can like bargain with them. So, well, the price tag says 2,500. What about 2,000? You're willing to sell it to me for 2,000. Do you have any specials on later in the month? Right? Process. Chung, 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 chung. Couple of thousand, couple of million times. Every finger snap is many times through this process, right? Now, we don't really experience it like that. To us, we just take this whole thing as like a aggregated experience and process. But if we can look at it in detail, then we'll see this is constantly going backwards and forwards. And each time you're cycling through it, the sense organs and the objects are a little bit different, even if that just means, perceiving the object like this, perceiving the object like this, and like this, and like this, are all, from this perspective, slightly different. Right? So it's constantly changing, making us form these overall ideas and impressions, for example, about the objects. So far, so good? Okay. How many of you have gone through this process today? You're not sure? You think you've maybe gone through this process today? You're going through this process right now, right? Okay. Even you're hearing me and trying to work out what I'm saying and should you put your hand up or not is just the same process, right? Now, a lot of it, of course, is very, the objects and the senses and so forth are not very strong feelings. They don't necessarily have very strong emotions attached to them. So they go through and we have a bit of ignorance. We just kind of don't really pay attention. What did you have for breakfast last week? I don't know, just some breakfast. But you probably remember that, like, oh, I had this amazing brunch like a year ago. Why do you remember that one? As we said last time, when they have strong sensations and emotional responses, they leave stronger impressions. Every time we're going through this process, boom, 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 we are dropping back future seed potentials. And those are then in turn conditioning the next round of what pops up when we go through this process. Yeah? So we're not just going through the process. By going through this process, we are then conditioning, like internally, our own future processes as well. Yes? Do you want to, just a second, we'll grab the mic there and so we can, people online can, I'm out of the camera range. If I walk over here, the camera can't chase me. Okay.
Could I ask, what about the scenario, let's say something triggered you and maybe anger arise, irritation or something arise, and you're on the verge of bursting out, but something hold you back maybe. So that scenario, how does it flows in this,
okay, that's a good question. Remember, we're only doing the construction of dissatisfaction at the moment. We've got to go through the whole practice of deconstruction. So your question there is kind of, rather than engaging with through an afflictive emotion, we want to restrain that afflictive emotion. So that's kind of on the process of the deconstruction. But let's still run with the question while we've got this diagram up. So can you give me something a bit more concrete as an example of something that might elicit anger or aversion? It could be hypothetical. It's entirely hypothetical. Or someone else, maybe? Somebody want to offer an example of something that might make you angry? you're on your way here in the morning, and you're taking the MRT. You call it MRT here, don't you? Yeah. You're taking the MRT, and you're just about to step on the escalator down, and someone rudely barges right in front of you, okay, and smashes into your leg with their suitcase or something. Painful feeling. So what's the response? Anger, okay. And you say, you're going to restrain that. Okay. Well, so let's just focus on that suitcase hitting your leg. Right, that's a really basic kind of, okay. Leg has a cognition, painful. Now, probably that initial aversion to that and anger, shall we say, is going to come up. It's just going to come up like that fast in general. I think your question was saying the emotion has come up, but you don't externally act on it. Is that what you're asking? Oh, okay. Okay. So, so let's say, for most people, yeah, it would just come right out, right? You curse them or, hey, you idiot. Maybe it was a kid or something, scold them right there and there, Didn't your parents teach you good behavior or something like that? Okay, but let's say you slow it down. There could be many reasons. There could be many reasons why you don't want to do that. I think the first thing you'd have to have would be at least the ability to see that emotion coming up, and it's not strong. It's not so strong that you just can't restrain it, right? It's within your tolerable threshold, shall we say. Now, the reasons why, there could be many reasons. Anyone want to suggest a reason why you wouldn't act on that? What specific perception? Yeah, you might just have that thought, anger is bad. So that feeling comes up, that emotion of anger comes up. That emotion of anger itself can become an object for your mind, and you perceive it, so you have that then thought, that's anger, right? I'm getting angry. Now, that thought, getting angry, is also an object, and based on that, you can have further perceptions, for example. And what might some of those perceptions would be? Oh my goodness, anger is one of the root afflictions. If I get, anger is tying me to samsara, And so you might have this, if you were conditioned strong enough, such that when you're having that as your object, that what kind of underlying seed potentials come up, the next thought would be, don't follow through on it. Don't speak out. Don't react. Now, some people would have that thought. Some people won't. What's the difference? And it's just basically, I would say, if you have conditioned yourself such that your conceptual ideas associated with anger are anger is bad, don't follow through on anger, plus your emotional conditioning is such that, because to have that concept is one thing, anger is bad, don't get angry, but you get angry. But also when it comes to then the sensations, the painful sensations, that you also conditioned yourself to respond to anger in a different way, which means to condition ourselves such that when a painful sensation happens, you just go, yeah, okay, this is a painful sensation. I don't have to push it away. I don't have to strike back against it. And again, this is a conditioning. Remember, these are all our conditionings here, right? If someone had that, so when that experience is happening, you've got enough of that conditioning so that the responses here, in terms of our intentions, which are all these here, might be enough to restrain ourselves. They might be like at the level, you go like, and you like sort of glare at them or something, or you don't even do that. Exactly how much is going to vary for individual people, right? Sure. All of these things are partly related to this conditioning, right? These conditionings. Some people wouldn't have a problem. Some people would think, anger, there's nothing wrong with anger, right? Anger, some people say, anger is good for me. I use anger to protect myself like a pufferfish, right? But that's because they've been conditioned in that way, right? They believe anger is able to protect them, yeah? And they have reasons for that. That's their life experience, and not just one life, but many lives up until this point, right? So when they go through that process, what happens internally takes them in that direction, and then they will act on it, right? And then the flip side maybe is something, not anger isn't good, I shouldn't act on it. Well, what should you do? Some people might be just like, swallow it sort of thing. Anger. Some people might be like, and not say anything. Some people might be conditioned that, it comes up, so you recognize that, and you might say, hey, you shouldn't do that. It doesn't mean I can't say something to that person, right? So, hey, you should watch where you're going. You should be more careful. It's dangerous to run on an escalator. But do you say that with a completely neutral voice? Or do you say that with a voice of compassion? Oh, little kid, don't run on the elevator. You might hurt yourself. Oh, my leg, right? Or it might be like you scold them. So there's a huge range of responses, and what's our conditioning? What's our conditioning? So a lot of what we call cultivation, there's the biggest factor in cultivation, we've got all these ideas, you do this and do that and whatever, and we can understand all the principles. The biggest thing, really, for most of us, for Buddhist cultivation, is simply do it once and repeat. You may say, well, I learned how to meditate on my breath. I first learned this 30 years ago, and I'm still doing exactly the same thing. Why am I still doing that? I should be at an advanced level breathing. No. A lot of practice isn't about doing more advanced stuff. It's just about hitting that really hard. Condition. Look at something like elite athletes, for example, or experts. Don't they have something like the 10,000 hours? Isn't it something like you do 10,000 hours worth of training, that kind of takes you up to kind of mastery level or something. It's such a ballpark figure, and I'm sure it would differ for all sorts of different skills. But I mean, the beginner pianist, fingers strike keys, make a sound, and the elite pianist is also fingers strike keys, make a sound. What's the difference? A lot of the time, now there are some physiological things, people with good genetics with big and flexible hands compared to someone with little stumpy fingers. There is going to be a difference in how well you play the piano, but the biggest difference is simply practice, absolute fluency. And cultivation's a lot like that. Training yourself, bam, it hurt, but instead of going down the it hurts aversion, dun 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 dun, we can take it in a different direction. Right? So that's why we call the Buddhist the training. They're trainings, just like you learn to play the piano or you learn how to kick a football. Now we're going to get into this in more detail because we still got the second half of the cultivation of mind. So have I kind of touched on your question? Okay.
Like, for example, if we are caught in a situation, right, and then we observe what's going on, and then we make a judgment of it, like how to respond. So the judgment is like a combination of cognition, sensation, perception. Is it all coming together? And then
these two here aren't really the judgment. These two in general, particularly this one, is not really something we can control. That suitcase hitting my leg and being painful, if that suitcase hits the Buddha's leg, it's also going to be painful. The painful bit isn't the problem. It's what happens after the pain, right? So in other words, depending on these seed potentials, what happens afterwards. So let's imagine maybe the Buddha, hypothetical, what would the Buddha do on the MRT, hit by a suitcase in the leg? The pain is there, he can see that pain, but he's not responding with these. And you could call that observation. You can see it, he's just observing it, right? And not, shall we say, reacting. This is kind of what we call the reaction phase, right? But it's possible to train ourselves, man, it's a painful feeling, and it's just a painful feeling. And that's okay, and it will go away after a while. And I'm not reacting to that. I can still do other things as well. Like I said, you could potentially act out of compassion, say, hey kids, don't be careful if you're running on the MRT here, because it's a bit dangerous. Yeah? But you'd need the ability to, shall we say, observe the pain without reacting to that, and then make a decision or what have you about how to respond. You could also just leave it and not say anything. Yeah?
Thank you.
Okay. Yes. And then we're here, and then we'll go over here. Yeah. Yep, just wait a sec, we'll hand you the mic there.
Just based on an example, I'm just thinking aloud. When I see sensation first, shouldn't that be the stage where it has to come before recognition? So you have data first, and then it comes to recognition, which is tied to your cognition.
I'm not using recognition would be like this. Cognition isn't recognition.
Okay, so the smell of the pizza comes to my nose, that's data coming in. So first to me is sensation. Only with the sensation.
Well, I'd say you're gonna have smelling before sensation. That's the usual explanation anyway. Yeah.
Okay. Because I look at the rest of it, it's just cognition and higher levels of cognition. So when you have
so what do you mean by higher levels of cognition?
Okay, the example of a pizza, right? The smell comes to my nose, that's data coming. So that's sensation for me. Second stage.
No. If it's pleasant, that's sensation. Or if it's unpleasant, that's sensation. You walk past the toilet and it's, oh, okay, that was painful sensation from that smell.
Okay, let me just reframe it. The 4 stages. Smell comes to my nose. There's no good, bad, pleasant, not pleasant. Okay, smell comes to my nose, that's sensation to me, number 1.
Okay.
And then number 2, it's a scent. To me, it's a scent. So that is cognition. It's a scent. It's a smell. Then your higher cognition.
So you have the thought that is a smell. Is that what you're saying?
That comes there. But I suppose you can argue that cognition and sensation can happen together if the conditioning is strong. It may not always be in the process order.
Okay.
All right? Okay. So then you got higher cognition is when you have the idea somehow, the pizza is calling out to me. It has disappeared to me. And then you have your intention, I'm a pizza eater, I love pizza. There's identity-driven cognition. So they're all processes of cognition, just whether at what level cognition is happening.
Okay, I think part of our different is just maybe we're using different words for these same things. And I'll admit, these are, I'm trying to use some English terms for some other language things, and while these terms are kind of standardized in English, but there's still a lot of scholars, for example, that will use different terms and stuff. And I'm not, like you say, in some ways this would be good to call it sensation because it's just sensing, right? So So
just want to establish one point. In your position, data comes in at the point of cognition.
I want to just even slow this down a bit.
Yeah.
I would not describe this, and I don't think in the Buddhist way of describing it to say data comes in. No, data doesn't come in. This does not come in. With these two become causes and conditions for this. Now, that might sound like it's a bit of semantic quibbling, but the phrasing that I've just given there is phrasing trying to use this idea of, Buddhist idea of dependent origination. That with these as condition, you get this. And with this as a condition, you get this, etc., like that.
Well, I'm just looking at it simply as a triangular formula.
And I think,
Object comes into contact with your sense organ, gives you data. Whether the data is a form of a smell, or whatever. Because you got your 5 senses, right? You got your nose, ears, and all that. So the outcome of the interaction between object and sense organ will give you a data. And the data can be categorized under sensation. Only when you have that data, then there's recognition. You cannot have recognition before the data.
Okay. What you've got there, if I was going to use the word data, I would use it to refer to this, not to the process here. Data is it's like, data is that kind of that raw stuff, and then data kind of doesn't mean anything in the way I understand it. But of course, humans interpret data. And so the data is the kind of the raw, a bit more on the objective side, and then human interpretation of data then enters into the human subjective conceptual understanding, shall we say, of it. But also, I think what you've got is also, if you're talking about the data, and then based on the data, you're going through some of these processes. I think, to me, what you might be describing is, like I said, this, again, in the very technical Buddhist sense, is that fast. And as we gave the example, say, with looking at the dress and seeing the dress and looking at the price tag, it's not that the whole process is just looking at the dress. What's happening is the object, at first it's external, but these here, all of these here, can also be objects, right? So if you've got a painful sensation, you've got some concept about it, for example, that in turn can be an object that we're aware of, and that concept can also in turn lead to sensations and perceptions as well. So you've got these multiple layers, they're happening very fast, layered and layered upon each other. What we generally get though then is the overall kind of view of those things. Now, one of the tricky things is that this is mostly taken from a text called the Madhupindika. I think this is the spelling, Madhupindika Sutta. In Chinese, Mi Wan Jing. Mi. Is this right? Is it this mi? Wana. Mi Wan Jing. Honeyball. It's the Honeyball Sutta. So why is this Honeyballs? He's not talking about honeyballs instead of pizzas. That this teaching is so good, it's like a honeyball. Such a good teaching. That's why it's called the Honeyball Sutta. Anyway, and so a lot of this kind of very fine-grained Buddhist take on perceptual process, in particular when we then move into the Abhidharma teachings and Yogacara, or the mind-only teachings, the Waisa teachings. Target audience is mostly for meditation specialists, right? So normally we're so reactive that this is just like blasting along constantly. We can't see the fine grain step by step. But with a lot of calm, then we see that mental process much more slowly, right? So, yeah, in practical terms, this is a bit too fine-grained, but I still think it's useful. But we just got to keep on remembering, our regular perception is this multiple layered upon each other. And so in each process, certain bits might stand out more than others. And it's also why we don't see like this particular order so much, right? Yeah, terminology though, it's a tricky one, the terminology. It's a tricky one. Okay, how are we doing? How are we doing, people? Oh, yeah, sorry, we had enough. That's right.
So,
That's right. Yes.
I just want to ask, how does awareness play in this? Because you can be hearing, but there is no formation of thoughts, there's no action.
So we could call this here awareness. Okay, now this is good because this brings up the issue I mentioned earlier, but I didn't get back to. So the idea, so what I'm using here for cognition. So I'm using cognition. Yeah, not always the best term. In Sanskrit is vijnana, Pali vijnana, almost the same. In Chinese, of course, this is shi, or sorry. In Taiwan, it's shi. In Putonghua, it's shi. Okay, I always hit this. Don't know why in Taiwan and mainland, different pronunciation. Anyway, so shi, either first or fourth tone. Now, normally in English, this gets translated as consciousness. And you could also probably say, like awareness, really. And of course, this comes from conscious and aware, but conscious and aware are verbs, right? So we need a noun for these. We need a noun for these. Now, one of the reasons why this is a little bit problematic is in English, if you put ness on the end of a word, so it makes it an abstract noun, right? Abstract nouns in English are singular. They're always in the singular, okay? So if we talk about this and we use the term consciousness here, it gives the idea we have this singular thing called consciousness. Like if I ask you right now, are you conscious? Are you conscious right now? Raise your hand if you're conscious. It basically just means, are you awake? Which we could also say, are you aware? But if I say consciousness or awareness, like, are you aware now? Are you conscious now? Yeah, right? Are you conscious now? Yeah. Are you conscious now? If I use the term consciousness or awareness, it makes it sound like it's the same thing 10 seconds ago, 5 seconds ago, and right now. This is not. This is not. These are moment by moment. Each one is an individual one. So I'm seeing now, and I'm seeing now, and I'm seeing now. And it's very easy for us to then think, well, that I'm seeing is this ongoing, unchanging state. The things I'm seeing change, my sensations and my perceptions about what I see change, but seeing itself has not changed. So it's a singular thing. It's a consciousness or an awareness. Now, this is very common in many of the non-Buddhist Indian traditions. This is the kind of property that is attributed to the idea of like an Atman or a soul. Sat, Chit, Ananda, right? Sat meaning it's real or eternal. Chit means it's conscious, but because it's eternally and unchanging, you can call it consciousness. Ananda, bliss. Sat, Chit, Ananda. Real or eternal consciousness, bliss are the qualities of the Atman, of the soul. And the Buddha's like, nah. We can talk about chit, we can talk about consciousness. Another word for this, of course, is, in the general sense, is chitta, and in Chinese that's just xin. But these are moment by moment. My seeing now and my seeing now and my seeing now are not the same seeing. But what we do as people is I'm seeing, and I'm seeing, and I'm seeing. So there must be this like unchanging thing called seeing, right? I'm conscious. I'm conscious. I'm conscious. So there's this unchanging thing called consciousness or awareness. It's not my feelings and my emotions about it, but consciousness itself is unchanging. That's why I say this one is the most subtle and one of the most easily misunderstood. So we can use this idea. If we just qualify it and we just say, yeah, I'm not talking about some unchanging awareness that's like a permanent thing. Yeah, we could call this awareness. You're just aware, right? You smell that smell, I'm aware of it, right? But we just got to be really careful we don't abstract it out. So aware could just be another word that we could use for this as well. Yeah. Does that answer the question? Okay.
Hi, Prof. Yeah. So for the word cognition, actually, when I saw the diagram, I thought you were trying to translate phasa or PHASSA, contact, instead of cognition. Because my understanding of vinyaya or consciousness is like the whole stage where the entire thing plays out.
Yeah. Okay. So good point. So what we're getting mentioned here is often this is said the three of these together is also known as contact. So in Pali, phasa, in Sanskrit, sparsha, in Chinese, chu, like 接触的触, right? Contact. Idea being it's like, the contact between the organs and the objects. But this kind of question, even in early Buddhism, was a bit of a debate. A lot of schools thought that contact was a thing in itself. I think it's a really problematic idea. When you have these, we call that contact. Contact is the act of them contacting, but it's not a separate thing called contact. That's the side I would lean on, yeah. So cognition here, yeah, you're right. There is this concept that says when that happens, that's called contact, but I don't want to make that into a thing. Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah, it makes like the eye consciousness, that kind of consciousness, right?
Yeah,
recognition.
Yep. Yeah, senses. These are our sense consciousness, There's a connection here. Also, like I said, if we just say consciousness or awareness, if I say, well, what I see, I'm conscious of what I see, or what I hear, or what I smell, consciousness becomes abstracted away from the different sense organs. But here it's not. Each individual cognition is based on a specific sense organ. So, visual cognition, seeing, is not the same as hearing, is not the same as smelling. They're all an act of kind of being aware of something, being conscious of something, but they're also distinct different things. Now, for most Buddhist schools, they would say that this process only happens with one sense organ at a time. So when you're smelling the pizza, you're not seeing the pizza. Well, that's a bit weird, right? But what if I'm looking at the pizza and I'm looking at it and I'm smelling it and I'm tasting it and I'm touching it? Surely that's happening at the same time. So a lot of the Abhidharma schools, they would be like, no. But remember, because this happens so fast, in one moment it could be your seeing, and the next moment it could be the smelling, and the next moment it could be the tasting. And so they're all kind of mushed together, and we think they're happening at the same time. That's the technical account of certain schools. But there are also some other schools that say no, they can happen simultaneously. For myself, I think there's no reason to think, based on our primary Buddhist textual sources, I don't think there's a really good argument to say that it can only be one sense at a time. And I think it's also incredibly counterintuitive. Yeah, we can be seeing and smelling and tasting and touching at the same time. And it's also possible that each of these can be giving us different sensations and different perceptions, right? it looks like a pizza, but it smells like a donut, right? And your brain's all like confused because it's got conflicting things. Things like that do happen. That's when we then take the object and we examine it closer to try to disambiguate what it is, etc., etc. Okay, how are we doing? So far, so good? Let's go a little bit further. We'll have a break soon-ish. So, main point is, this process happens very fast. It goes from the material through the mental, back to the material world, and influences, because basically between all the objects of the world and our senses, that's the entirety of the physical world. And this here is also the entirety of our inner world. And it's a feedback loop. It's a feedback loop not just physically, but it's also a feedback loop mentally as well. So it's like self-conditioning, like a self-conditioning loop. Now, particularly because, so what we describe here is the kind of the problem, right? Reacting with the emotional afflictions and having conceptual problems as well. But because these are feedback loops, it also means that there's the possibility to change it. If this is our active mental states, these are our active mental states, and this is the giant iceberg beneath the water, we're constantly reseeding the mind. So that also means that there's this potential for reconditioning ourselves. And if you really want to take it to its logical conclusion, it's possible to recondition absolutely everything about ourselves. Now, when I say that, it doesn't mean you can do it overnight. Sign up here, within 7 days you will be superwoman. No, not so fast. I'm not promising speed, just that all of these are conditioned, and therefore there is the possibility of changing every single thing about ourselves. But it's going to take time. And it includes your physical body, because when your body's going to die, you're going to come back and get another body. And what body we get in the next life is also dependent upon our actions and our karma and our seed potentials that we have now. So it's possible to change everything, the physical, the emotional, the mental, right? If we were to compare ourselves 1,000 lifetimes ago to who we are now, I don't know. I don't know how much we would be alike. Could be radically different. Might not even recognize yourself. So that's a very wonderful thing, right? Before we're sort of saying, oh, we don't know, we've got all these potential problems. Yeah, but we've also got a huge amount of potential cool stuff and really amazing and good stuff as well, right? A lot of cultivation is, we have the idea of the 4 right efforts. And within the 4 right efforts, one of them is to basically, stop the bad stuff that we do. And the other one is to constantly generate the good stuff, right? The more we can prevent these potentially damaging seeds from being reseeded, and the more that we can develop positive seeds from being reseeded, then we're going to shift this whole direction of our lives. Okay, mental process. Oh, there's our pizza. We should have been looking at this all along. Okay. Now, those are our 3 steps. We've gone from the underlying potentials, which, if we just take it from today, right now, those are already there. We've got these active mental states, which you're experiencing right now, hopefully. And then we've got the external actions that we do based on these things. That's the process that we're going through now. Let's jump out of that for a second and look for a slightly different element on this general heading of Buddhist psychology, which is personality types and mental states. So a lot of systems, most systems of psychology, and not just systems of psychology, but religious teachings and philosophical teachings and whatever, have some kind of like personality analysis. Nowadays, one of the most super kind of pop psychology one is that I don't know what it's called. It's like, they use just like 4 letters. What's it called? MBTI, okay. I don't really know much about that. I know it's super popular, but my very limited understanding is this isn't actually developed by recognized psychologists or psychiatrists. It really is quite pop psychology. That's still kind of helpful to like go through it and reflect on who we are and reflect on who other people are. So there's lots of different systems, right? That's my main point. Lots of different systems. There's no one single way of looking at it. Some of them are very simple. That system's kind of interesting because you've got like 4 different categories, which is better than, one of the most simple forms is just, the introvert, extrovert one. So I think that's highly popularized by Carl Jung, probably like a century ago now. Really simple. 1 line, right? And only 2 elements. You're an extrovert or an introvert or maybe somewhere in the middle. One nice thing about the BG, what's it called? You guys all know this very well, don't you? Have you gone through, who are you? Do you know what you are in this system? You know what you are? Do you think it's helpful? Yeah, sounds like, no, not really. Okay. It's interesting because at least it gives you 4 different like axes to look at things, right? And if we really think about it, in terms of personality, we're not one-dimensional lines and you're at this end or this end. We're not even 2-dimensional, right? We're like multi-dimensional. And that's important to keep in mind. So we're going to look at one of the most kind of basic and the old Buddhist forms, and it's based around the predominance of certain mental states, okay? The predominance of certain mental states. And of course, because it's Buddhist thought, these things are not fixed. So it's not like if you're this particular temperament, shall we say, that's who you are forever and ever. No. Like, all these things are changing anyway. But this was developed specifically for practitioners to decide what kind of meditation, what kind of practice should they be involved in. And this is a really important question. So which states are predominant in a person? No, blah, 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 some random thing off the internet. Personality, introvert, indifferent, impulsive, confident, carefree, open-minded. It's just repeating itself. Introvert, extrovert. There's only about 10 words here that just repeated over and over again. I should have vetted my PowerPoint a bit better, shouldn't I? Anyway. So what are these 6? Now, we've already seen the first 3, like mental states, we've already seen. So one is the so-called desirous type. So that is when the predominant emotion, or we could almost say like the predominant driving force is desire. Now, this is most people. Most people. A predominant driving force, desire, desiring pleasure. Pleasure-seeking people. This is most of us. Now, like I said, predominant, it's not the only emotion. Everyone's got all of these different emotions going on, but you can kind of know. You know the people I'm talking about, right? The second one is the aversion type. This is more like the pufferfish, right? Those spikes are like the, get back. So aversion to pain. So this is, kind of more the chasing pleasure, and this is more the aversion to pain. And because it's the pleasure goes with the desire, and the aversion type, with regard to pain and aversion, anger. So this might also be associated more with a bad temper, right? Painful things come back, keep them away, right? Keep them back. And you can guess what the third one is, right? Kind of the deluded type. And there's some text that kind of describe, so how do you identify which one they are? And so, like I said, these were originally brought up in the context of like monastics. So a young monastic wants to engage in a particular meditation practice, so they should go and find a good teacher. They should serve the teacher, get to know the teacher, and the teacher gets to know them. And so if you're the teacher, how do you identify it? And so they use these very basic kinds of behavior that like novice monks or novice nuns would be doing to identify it. And one of them is like how people eat food. How people eat food. How many of you, when you look at your plate of food, how many of you see which bit on the plate you like most and leave it till last? How many of you do that? How many of you eat that bit first? Okay, so this was one of the things to use. So the teacher's watching the novice, like, what do they eat? The aversion type, there's certain things they don't like, so they just won't eat those. The desirous is probably going to eat everything, right? And the aversion type doesn't eat everything. There's some things they just don't want to eat, throw them off the plate. The deluded type, what do you think? They kind of don't know what they're eating. They're eating, they're not paying attention, they're dropping food, smearing food all over their face, whatever. How accurate is this? I don't know, but it's kind of interesting to see, right? And they give some other example, like sweeping. So the desirous type, when they sweep, they're very, very careful in all the corners and whatever. And then there's the angry type, like doing battle with the dust. And the deluded type is just kind of like, missing bits and stuff like that. Kind of funny. Okay, those are only the first three. We also get a kind of a conceit type, and that's the more. So these, remember, more the emotion side. This was, remember, more the conceptual type, right? From the perceptions and the self-centered view. So the conceit type is the self-centered conceit, and also jealousy. Just to note, in Buddhism, I use the word conceit. In Chinese, this would be like man. Man, the man, right? But normally you might translate man as something like pride, right? Or arrogance, like man or jiao man. Be careful. And then we might contrast, like, pride is not good, but being humble, that's a good one, right? Okay. Yeah, being humble is better than being arrogant. But they both have a common thing. The commonality is self-view, right? Because even to be humble, say, I'm not worthy, you're so much better than me. You've still got the self-view, right? And there's me like this, and there's you like that. And so I'm still got a self-centered view. It's just I'm not raising myself above others, but I'm putting myself below. This is still potentially problematic, right? Humble can be of different types, and it's easy to confuse kind of like 自卑, like lack of self-confidence and lack of self-worth with being humble. They're not the same thing, right? And that lack of self-worth, for example, that's not a virtue. That's also potentially very harmful as well, right? So the main point is, all of these here are really they're still based around the self-centered perspective, right? And jealousy too, we were talking a bit about jealousy yesterday. One of the elements of jealousy is also comparing ourselves with others. Who do you think we are most likely to be jealous about or with respect to? So think, times you've been jealous or you see other people being jealous. Who do you think we're more likely to be jealous about? Oh, no, I mean, which people? Which people? What about things like sibling jealousy? Anyone experienced that? Probably most of us, actually, right? Why? I think one of the things is like we're in such, with our siblings, just assuming we've grown up in the same household with our siblings, shall we say, we're probably more likely to be jealous of our siblings in some ways than maybe our other kids or other friends we have when we're like a kid. Why? Because, we're kind of competing for the same affection of those same people. And it's often the people I think that we're kind of closest to and most similar to that we have that jealousy and that kind of rivalry. And so I think part of that, but not the whole thing, is it's a way of making a difference between me and my siblings, right? Because we share so much in common. We've got the same name, same family name, we grew up in the same da-da-da, we probably have similar toys, etc., etc., etc. How do I distinguish myself from my siblings? So that distinguishing is self-centered. How do I make me and not you? I'm not really jealous of, I don't know, Ronaldo, the famous football player. I mean, kind of, he's like so attractive and he's famous and he's got so much money, but I have no feeling like that. He's just like this totally other, different person out there in the world, right? But maybe other people who do Buddhist studies and they get all the kind of, they get all the praise and people say their scholarship is very good. But what about my scholarship, right? Someone much closer to me is someone that I'm much more likely to have jealousy towards because it's coming closer to my definition of who I am. Okay, so this is another type that's also an afflictive type. You've cured my insufferable conceit, Doc, now I'm perfect. Okay. There's also the scattered type. It's a little bit like the deluded type. Excessive, disordered, uncontrolled thinking. And the last type, the mixed type is like a bit of all of these things. So in general, yes, we have all of these problems, but reflect for a moment on which one is the dominant one. And so why do we do it like this? It's kind of saying, cultivation, where should you start your cultivation? First, identify what your biggest problem is and work on that. Find your biggest problem, work on your biggest problem. Once you start to deal with that biggest problem, you might find after a while it's no longer your biggest problem. What do you do then? You change, right? You don't necessarily have to keep on going until that's absolutely not a problem. No, don't do that. Some other problem's going to come up. Then you change and turn your focus to that. So when we're talking about personality and mental types, like I said, these are changing things, right? And you need to be flexible. Think for a moment. Think for a moment. Which one are you? Not of these people. Which personality type are you? Are you a desirous type? Are you an aversion type? Are you a deluded type? Are you a conceit type? Are you what was the other one? What was the other one? I've forgotten. Scattered type. Are you just like a mixed type? Yeah, I've got them all. I've got all these problems in equal measure. Think about that for a second. One last thing before we go to a break. We should have a break in a second. Okay, buddy time. Pair up with your buddies. We're going to have some raw honesty. Share which of these temperaments or personality types you think is closer to you. And we'll just do this we'll do it for 2 minutes, and then we're going to go to a break, okay?